Hi, my name is Brittany Gregg, and I am the Assistant Director in the Office of Disability Services at the University of Alabama. And today I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about disability awareness on campus. So some things that we're going to cover today will be ODS's contact information, a little bit about what the student profile looks like on campus in terms of students with disabilities, some common accommodations that our office provides, as well as inclusive programs and services, some ways that you guys can keep inclusion in mind when you're planning events and programs. And then finally, some resources that are on campus to help you. So ODS is located in Hauser Hall in room 1000. Pretty much as soon as you walk into Hauser Hall, we are right there on the right. And so we're just across from the Ferguson Student Center, very centrally located. Our phone number and email are on this slide. We've also got a lot of information on our website that talks about how to register with us, the accommodations we provide, just a lot of really in-depth information as well as some videos. And so I always encourage people to go to our website as well to learn more about us. So just to give you guys an idea, this image is kind of a snapshot of what our caseload looked like in September of 2019. So about a year ago, we typically have about 2,400 students registered with our office, and it's really important to keep in mind that 45% of those students have more than one type of disability. And so a lot of times when we think about disability, we think about it, as just one specific diagnosis, and often something that may be visible to us or that may be readily apparent just by looking at someone or interacting with them. But in reality, and especially on our campus, what this really looks like is students, quite a few students who have more than one disability, and a lot of students who have what we would call an invisible disability that's not going to be obvious to you just upon looking at someone or interacting with someone. And so the majority of students at UA are seeking accommodations due to cognitive disabilities like ADHD or any type of learning disability. So that's the majority of our students. After that, we have psychiatric or behavioral health disabilities, which are things like depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, etc. Also, medical disabilities are pretty common. And that can be any type of medical condition that is impacting a person. So a really big variety there, but a lot of what we see are things like diabetes, migraines, gastrointestinal disorders like Crohn's disease, and things of that nature. And then a smaller percentage of our student population includes vision impairments, so blindness or low vision, autism, neurocognitive disabilities such as a traumatic brain injury, a hearing disability, so deafness or students who are hard of hearing, and then mobility. So I like to go over this information. It just kind of gives you a visual to help you remember that, the majority of students with disabilities on campus are going to look and act just like every other student. And so it's important to just keep inclusivity in mind, knowing that you're going to be interacting with peers who have disabilities, and you may not automatically know that. So some common accommodations that our office provides, the purpose of an accommodation is to provide equal access, to allow a student to fully participate in campus programs and activities. So some people have a misconception that accommodations provide like an unfair advantage, and that's not true. The purpose behind an accommodation is just to be sure that students with disabilities can participate just like students without disabilities. So we're just trying to make sure that they have the same level of access. And some common accommodations that we provide are things like testing accommodations, such as extended testing time, access to class notes for students who are unable to take their own notes, closed captioning on videos, large print materials, e-text, which is kind of like electronic text or an e-book, and sign language interpreters. So there's a wide variety of accommodations that we provide. These are just some examples. It's not like a menu that you order from. You know, if you come in and you tell me that you have ADHD, I'm not going to hand you a list and say, well, here are your accommodations. We're going to do an individualized assessment with students to determine, you know, how are you impacted by your disability and what accommodations would best create access for you. So it's individualized. It looks a little different for each student. And so that's why it's not really possible to describe every single accommodation that we've put into place, but these are just some common examples. So I also want to talk about 4 things that you can do to promote inclusive programming services and activities, because we've already mentioned that you are going to be interacting with your peers who have disabilities, and you may not automatically know that about them. And so these are just some good practices that will help your programming be more inclusive to the needs of people with disabilities. So one thing we recommend is to put an inclusive program statement or an access statement on materials for events or programs that you are sponsoring. An example would be to just include the following statement. For questions about accessibility or to request accommodations for this event, please contact name at voice or email. Requests should be made at least X number of days prior to the event. So you can kind of fill in the information to make it specific to you and your event. But this is just a really helpful way for students to know, like if they need to be sure that a certain type of access is provided, they know who to contact about that and how much lead time to give you. It also communicates, though, that you're open to inclusivity and access. And so it would make someone with a disability perhaps feel more comfortable attending, just knowing that access is something that was on your mind. So we recommend this. And, if someone does contact you and you're not really sure how to respond or how to talk about access or provide them with the information that they're requesting, just take their information, ask them in general, what kind of access are you needing, or what specific questions about access do you have? And then you can follow up with them after speaking with, perhaps another student who's in charge of the event or a faculty or staff member to kind of get some guidance on how to respond. You also want to consider accessible forms of communication. So when you're using social media or email, it's a good practice to include an image description where, like, let's say, for example, that you have an image of an invitation to an event. All of the text that's on that image should actually be included in the body of the email or in the description of the social media post. And the reason for that is because if you're just copying and pasting an image of an invitation into an email, that is not automatically accessible. So if someone was using technology to hear their emails read out loud to them, maybe they have a visual impairment, or maybe they have difficulty processing information visually, that image is not accessible, and so their technology is not going to be able to read that to them. And so that is why any print or text that is on an image should also be typed out into the body of an email or the description of a social media post. It's also good to offer alternative formats. So if you're going to have printed materials at your event, you may want to be prepared to offer a large print or digital formats. Digital formats work better than large print just because it does allow the individual to customize the font size, color contrast, and things like that based on whatever it is that they need. You also want to speak your presentation text. And so as you are, going through like a PowerPoint presentation, for example, it is generally a good practice to speak out loud any text that you have in your PowerPoint. And then you also want to use closed caption videos. So let's say you're having a movie screening. Be sure that the version of the movie you are showing has the closed captions on it and turn them on during the movie. There's a lot of research about closed captions, and it's actually beneficial for a lot of people, not just people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It also helps people who use English as a second language, people who may have processing difficulties. I know for me personally, if I'm watching, let's say, a European show or a British show, it is helpful for me to have the captions on just because there's a difference in accent. And sometimes I have difficulty understanding different accents. And so closed caption is a great practice for everyone. This is an example of an image description. This actually, the Division of Student Life at UA, this is an example of a social media post that they made on Facebook. And this one was in celebration of MLK Junior Day last year, I think, or maybe the year before. And there is no image description on this post. The post itself says, "We're officially closed today in honor of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, but our students are making a difference with the University of Alabama Center for Service and Leadership, #Bama Student Life." So if I am not able to see this image, the part that I just read out loud, that's all I can really see. And so the image that goes along with it would not be something that I would be privy to. And so if we're following best practices, underneath your actual post, you could put what's on the bottom of this slide. So you would type out image description, and then you would just provide text that describes the image to someone. And so what we have here in order to describe this particular image, it says, "Black and white photo of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. standing at a podium. He is mid-speech and his arm is extended. In the top right corner of the image, there is white text that reads, 'Life's most persistent and urgent question is, what are you doing for others?'" So again, if I'm a person who maybe I can't see this image, or, I'm using technology that's going to read these things to me, an image description provides, whatever is visually on the page, the image description provides that for the individual for access. So it's also important to consider accessible spaces. You want to make sure that an accessible entrance or a restroom, people know how to access those. And so if you can provide some kind of signage, that's really great. You also want to consider accessible seating and table setup. So, some people may use mobility devices or crutches or a scooter, especially if they have like a temporary injury. So you just want to keep those things in mind so that you're creating spaces and setups that allow those people to navigate the room as well. If you're providing food at your event, a lot of people may have food allergies or particular dietary restrictions. So it is a good idea to keep that in mind when you're ordering food. And it's really great to kind of use foods that, each item can be served separately, and then each individual can choose, whether or not that's an item that they can eat or want to eat. So things that people can kind of assemble themselves, that's always really helpful. And then if travel is involved, just be prepared to provide accessible transportation. And I want to be sure that everyone knows the UA campus map is really cool because it has an ADA accessibility layer that you can select. And so any building that you're trying to look at, it will show you where the accessible entrance and parking is for that building. So that's something that's also really handy to include if you're having any events, especially if those events involve people from the community who may not be as familiar with our campus. And then finally, we want to be sure that we're creating a welcoming environment for all students. And so here's just kind of some basic things that can contribute to that. It's always good to use person-first language. So we don't want to say disabled person. Instead, we would say individual with a disability. You don't want to use words like confined to a wheelchair or wheelchair bound. Instead, you would want to say a person who uses a wheelchair. So just putting the person before the disability is kind of the general principle there. If you do encounter someone with a disability and it seems to you like they might need help, just ask them. Don't assume that people necessarily need help, because people with disabilities are used to navigating the world that's not designed for them. So they're used to having to overcome barriers, and they may or may not want to accept help in that moment. So it's okay to just be like, hey, can I help you with this? And if they say yeah, that's great. If they say no, just say, okay, no problem. If a student is using an interpreter or a captionist, this means that they do have some level of hearing impairment, and it's really important to remember to just continue speaking directly to the student. An interpreter or captionist is similar to a translator in that scenario, and so you're still going to want to communicate and make eye contact directly with the student or individual as opposed to the interpreter or captionist. And then if someone is using a mobility device, just keep in mind this is part of their personal space. So, you don't want to touch a person's wheelchair or lean on it, without their permission or anything like that. Treat their mobility device as if it's part of their body, because they are using it for that purpose. So I hope that information has just been kind of, helpful to give you a sense of what we do and how to create an inclusive environment in the work that you do and your interactions with students. There are some additional resources on our website. We've got faculty pages and staff pages that have more information that may be helpful to you. We have a faculty training video. Even though you guys aren't faculty, if you are curious about just more details about what I've talked about today, or kind of the legal aspects of what we do, you may find it interesting to watch the faculty video. The university does have an ADA compliance officer and an ADA hotline. So if you're on campus and you happen to notice something that you think could be an access barrier, maybe there's a huge construction truck blocking a sidewalk, or, there's like an ADA, an accessible parking space that is being blocked by something that shouldn't be there. There's a automatic door that's not operating correctly. You can report those things, whether you have a disability or not. It's just a way of helping the university stay on top of anything that may be malfunctioning and then correct it. And each college or division has an ADA 504 coordinator. So I've put the website on here where you can find that information. For Student Life, that person is Dr. Stephen Hood. And so he just kind of serves as a liaison for any ADA or 504 concerns or questions. And then finally, there's the Office of Emerging Technology and Accessibility, and they have a lot of really cool training and resources on how to make, any technology, like your social media posts, or if you're creating Word documents or PDFs, they can offer training on how to make those things accessible. They also have a captioning grant. So if you're ever producing a video that is going to be widely distributed and a lot of people are going to see it, you can actually apply to use the grant to have your video captioned professionally so that it is accessible. So I just want to be sure that you guys know about those resources. If you're ever working with a peer or a friend who has a disability, don't be afraid to tell them about our office. We are happy to meet with students and just kind of talk through what's going on and ways that we could help. There's no commitment involved. Everything we do is very confidential. So we don't share, if a student tells us something, we don't share that with other people. It's all very private. And so we want students to feel like our office is also a welcoming place. And so I would just kind of encourage you to keep that in mind, especially as we begin a new academic year. Anyone who has questions about accommodations, we would be happy to talk with them. And definitely, if you all have any questions following this presentation, you are welcome to contact me directly. I forgot to include my information on here, but it is on the ODS website, and I can give you my email address. It's B as in Brittany, M as in Michelle, and my last name Gregg, GREGG @ua.edu. Thank you guys so much for your attention during this presentation. I hope that you all have a wonderful year and do be in touch if there's anything that we can do or help with. Thank you so much.